Okay, so we finished talking in the last section about how this origin of this idea of Eastern Europe came about. So it starts again with the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment has this strange view, like I was discussing, that the Orient, the East, represents something exotic, something foreign, inherently different than themselves. So travel writers, they go to the East, they're looking for uh, evidence to confirm these preconceived notions, and that's what it comes with this viewpoint. You're approaching the East already with ideas, and what happens is this: as the travel writers go with these preconceived notions, they confirm their suspicions by finding anything that will fit the description they'd already had thought about of this area. So no matter what happens in Eastern Europe, they're convinced of that this is a dangerous place and so foreign and so backward. And this is really a key element to this, the conceptions of this area, that Eastern Europe is always seen as backwards as compared to Western Europe. Is this true? No. Economically, were they as strong as Western Europe? It depends where you were in Eastern Europe at the time period, and what time period we're even talking about. So Vienna at the turn of the century is this bustling major city of Europe, and comparable in all regards to any city in the West. If you went out to, Ruthenia or Romania, you would find peasant populations who were in rural poverty. Was their poverty as bad as, say, in much of Russia? Probably not as bad, and they didn't have to deal with famine as often and such, because this was a better region for growing food and for raising animals. So there's a relative sense of depending on what aspect are you discussing here. Now, to catch us up to the modern age, because Western Europe progressed faster in the Industrial Revolution, especially in Britain in the 19th century, and then eventually with Germany very much an equal by the end of the century. Again, Eastern Europe is given this designation of being backward because generally the population is being supported by agricultural production. And so therefore, again, they're still deemed as being backwards and not as advanced. So those ideas progress into World War I, where these economies cannot compete in terms of production of armaments as compared to the West. And when the new nation states are formed following World War I, again, as these nations try to compete against the West, they face a lot of difficulties and need to be part of greater blocks of power. Colonial empires still dominate in many ways. The British Empire is, in the early 20th century, a trading bloc in which they can raise tariffs against these small nations that are trying to compete and such. By the time we get to our modern conceptions of Eastern Europe, they are infused with the idea of the Soviet Union, because in the post-World War era, these nations, these modern nations that we're covering, were either now part of the Soviet Union, as in the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, as republics, or they are under, in many ways, colonial type supervision by the Soviet Union, as in the case in the Czech Republic or in Hungary, and some have an ambiguous relationship with Russia or the Soviet Union. So new conceptions of Eastern Europe are imprinted on the map based on the Cold War. And the Cold War says Europe is divided, and there's an Iron Curtain has descended. That's what Churchill's famous line is in '46, although he does not tell the audience that he was very much in the part of determining how Eastern Europe would be divided way before the end of the war with Stalin. They kind of divvied out Europe. We'll probably discuss some of those issues later on. And then Eastern Europe is seen as this red region. And if you look on maps of the time period, it's often drawn in red. This is under communism, and these people then become part of a certain regional description as well. So Eastern Europe then is faced with being again stereotyped under what it means to be communist, and the intellectuals of this region try very hard to break away from that idea, and many of the leading intellectuals of this region vehemently voice the idea that they are Central Europeans. And we hear this in Hungary and in Czechoslovakia and many other places as well. And why do they say they're Central Europeans? Because to be Eastern European is to be considered backwards, again, even in their own minds. When I lived in Hungary, we talked about, going into Romania, they'd say that's East, that's Asia. And Hungary is in Western Europe or in Central Europe. So these ideas still remain even into the peoples of this area. What do we call this area today? And geographers are still in contention over this as well. Where is Central Europe? Does it include Germany? Is it in Austria? Where is it geographically? Well, that determined often by where we designate Europe to be in general. Are the Ural Mountains the border? Or is the Black Sea the border? These change over time as well. So geographically, it's ambiguous as well. Now, again, stereotypes remain of these peoples and of this place. There's the stereotype of what you saw maybe in the movie Borat. Although he says he's from Kazakhstan, the stereotype he portrays is of an Eastern European, a place where Western Europeans don't know much about, where they have notions of people who dress differently from themselves and speak in a funny accent and say outrageous things. I mean, he really captures that stereotype of what an Eastern European is, and if you understand the time period when this is being portrayed, in the UK, for example, where the comedian who developed Borat was under a time period when the EU opened up immigration from the East, and the UK had 2 million people arrive, many from Poland. And so a lot of those stereotypes go around with what people think these new immigrants would be like. And that's where I want you to think about now for this first discussion post. The question that I want you to address is, what are your views of Eastern Europe? What are your preconceived notions? Or you can discuss, maybe you've been there and what your notions were and how they changed. Or you can discuss maybe if you have a family background, what you thought Eastern Europe was like, or from your family's experience, your grandmother or other relatives. So what in general do you see as Eastern Europe, and why might it be different, or where is the geographical boundaries? We're just looking for some insight here, that just there's no right or wrong answer. It's just whether or not you give some insight into your own views here. So I'm looking for some good information, and also aside from this paragraph on that, for you to give a little introduction to yourself. So introduce yourself to the class, and so we can get to know you a little bit better. And Unit 1 will start later this week, and this is the end of the introduction. And if you have any questions or problems, please email me. Thanks a lot.